Okay, today's daf is Nun Gimel Amud, and we're going to start at Nun Bet Amud Bet with the new perek Ketzad Me'aberin. So this perek is going to begin with some halacha, but it's going to very quickly go into Agadah for the next 2 pages. So the Mishnah says Ketzad Me'aberin et Te'arim. How do we define the border of cities? Because we know that you have 2,000 amot outside of the city limit that you can walk. Where is the city limit drawn? Obviously, not every city limit is smooth. You can have houses protruding, houses that are recessed into the border of the city. So where do you draw the line, literally? So Ketzad Me'aberin et Te'arim. Bayit nichnas, bayit yotzeh. You can have a house that protrudes from the line of the city, or a house that comes in. You can have pagum nechnas and pagum yotze. You can have situations where you have these, for example, you'll have different kinds of, Rashi says, pagum here means that you have migdalim agulim boltim. You have rounded sorts of towers that stick out from the wall or are recessed into the wall. Hayusham gedudiot gevohot asrat tefachim. You might have ruins that lie on the outskirts of the city. Are they included in the city? And we turn to Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, Ugsharim. You have bridges, unfashot. You have mausoleums of some sort. In other words, you have some kind of batei kvarot. You have cemeteries, sheyesh behen bet dira, that the bridge or the cemetery has some kind of a dwelling place for the person who's in charge of the bridge, for the toll collector of the bridge, and the mausoleum or the cemetery has some kind of a residence for the caretaker of the cemetery to live in, so it's considered to be part of the residences of that area. So when we measure the city to determine what are the borders of the city, we include these things in our definition of the city. And in the end, whatever we create, when we want to make a map of the city to determine where we're going to measure the 2,000 amot from, we make a square kind of a map. It's not necessarily square or rectangular. In other words, it's something with 4 corners. So whatever the widest protrusion is, that's where the line is going to have to be drawn. But we don't draw a jagged edge around the city. We draw straight lines only. So there's going to be a straight line to the left, a straight line to the right, a straight line on top, a straight line on the bottom to make something which is some kind of rectangular shape. Okay, so that means that even if something protrudes just at one point, we're going to have to move the entire line out to that point, because we're not going to make a line that curves around. We're going to make only a straight line. So the straight line has to be outside of whatever protrudes the furthest. Meruba'at kedei niskarat hazaviot. The point is, it has to be rectangular, so we have corners. It has 4 corners. So this is the concept of the definition of the city limits. And the chidush here, obviously, the novel concept here is that we are not drawing the line in a jagged kind of way to make to make it exactly precise in terms of what the city looks like. So, for example, if you look here, you'll see, if you look in illustration number 191, there are all kinds of houses and different structures dispersed throughout the city, and the line on the top, the line on each side, the line on the bottom is drawn after the last protrusion in each direction. Even though you could make a squiggly line that would just go from house to house all around, then you'd have a very squiggly line. Instead, we just make a squarish kind of line to define the borders. Now the Gemara says, Rav u'Shmuel had tanei me'abirin v'had tanei me'abirin. There were 2 different versions of the Mishnah, one that had an ayin and one that had an aleph. Me'abirin means we make it like a pregnant woman. Me'abirin with an aleph means we make it like a limb. So Rashi explains what's the difference. Because this city that has a jagged edge to it, it has protruding houses. It's not a smooth, square development where everything lines up. So it's like limbs sticking out. It's also like a pregnant woman who has part of her body that's sticking out. So what was the language of the Mishnah? Was it with an ayin, me'abirin, or was it with an aleph, me'avrin? Okay, man detane me'abrin, the one that has the aleph says ever ever. We're talking about it like limbs sticking out. Man detane me'abrin, the one that uses the ayin says isha ubara, like a woman who is pregnant. Now that is all for the. Really, that's the essentially. Puts us onto a totally different track of Agadah that is going to come back and touch the Mishnah a little bit, but not too much. So now the Gemara, because the Mishnah had mentioned incidentally, it had mentioned a disagreement about the meaning of a word. Is it me'aberin with an aleph or an ayin? So Rashi says because of that we get into a discussion of machpelah. Why is Ma'arata Machpelah called Machpelah? Machpelah comes from the word kaful, to be doubled. So what does it mean, Machpelah? Ma'arata Machpelah, Rav Shmuel, and again, Rav and Shmuel argue about the meaning of the word, so that's why this is connected in a free associative train to what we just said about Me'abrin and Me'abrin. Okay, so now we have Marata Machpelah. What does it mean? So Rav Ushmuel Chad Amar Shnei Batim Ze Lefanim Mizeh. So according to Shmuel, so one of them says, we don't know which one said what. Rav and Shmuel argue, and we don't know which one said what. That one Shnei Batim Ze Lefanim Mizeh, that you have two chambers. One is inside the other one. One says that it was a cave that had two levels, one on top of the other. One said that it was a cave that had two chambers, one within the other. So you had a chamber number one, and then you would walk further into the cave, and there was another chamber. That's why it was called Marata Machpelah. So Bishlam Alemanda Amar Zel Gavzeh, we understand according to the one that says that it was one chamber on top of another Hainu Machpelah. That's why it's called doubled, because most caves don't have one chamber on top of another like that. So that's why it's unique. It's called Machpelah. But according to the one that says one is inside the other, my Machpelah. Why is it called Machpelah? A doubled cave. Many caves have two chambers. You walk into one, you walk further into the cave, and there's another space back there, right? That's very common. So why is it called Machpelah, doubled? So the answer is because Shekfula Bazugot, because there were many Zugot, there were many couples buried inside Marata Machpelah. That's why it's called Machpelah, not because of the structure. Mamre Kiryat Arba. I think it's actually the pasuk is Mamre Kiryat Ha-Arba. Right. That's what it says on the side, that Yaakov came to Yitzchak his father in Mamre Kiryat Arba, the city of the four. What does it mean, Kiryat Arba? Rabbi Yitzchak says Kiryat Arba Zugot. It is the city that has the four couples buried in Marata Machpelah: Adam v'Chava, Adam and Eve, Abraham v'Sarah, Yitzchak v'Rivka, Yaakov v'Leah. So this came to be known Kiryat Arba, the city of the four, because there were four couples buried in Marata Machpelah. Vayhi b'mei Amrafel, it talks about the war between the four kings and the five kings that broke out in the days of Abraham Avinu. And again, we have an argument between Rav and Shmuel about the meaning of a certain word. So that's why this is a continuation of our Gemara here. Normally, now it's exactly what I was saying before. They were talking about something Rav and Shmuel said about our Mishnah. They said, oh, this reminds me of another thing Rav and Shmuel said about a word that they disagreed about, and we don't know which one said which interpretation. That Amrafel, who's Amrafel? Rav Shmuel Chad Amar Nimrod Shemo. One says this Amrafel was actually Nimrod. Okay? So why was he called Amrafel? Velama nikra shemo Amrafel. Why was he called Amrafel? She'amar v'hipil Avraham Avinu betoch kivshan ha'esh. Because he was the one that threw Avraham Avinu. She'amar. But Amrafel comes from the word Amar and Pel. It's split into two things, or Pil, right? So he's saying he said to throw Avraham into Kivshan Ha'esh, into the fiery furnace, and that's why it's called Amrafel, but really it was Nimrod. V'chad Amar Amrafel, one says Amrafel Shemo. Actually, no. Amrafel was his real name. V'lama nikra Shemo Nimrod. Why was he called Nimrod? Sheimrid et kol ha'olam kulo alav b'malchuto. Because he caused the entire world to rebel against God, so to speak, when he was ruling. So Nimrod comes from the word mered, rebellion. So what's the point here? The idea is that everybody agrees that Amrafel and Nimrod are the same person. The question is, which was the real name? Was Amrafel the real name, or was Nimrod the real name? By the way, there is a Gemara available if you want a book. There's two books here that nobody's using, if anybody wants one. And there's one under your package. So, Vayakom Melech Hadash al Mitzrayim, it says that a new king rose above Egypt. This new king was known as, this was Paro. This is from the story of Mitzrayim, the story of the beginning of the book of Shemot. it says, "Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim shelo yada et Yosef." A new king rose above over Egypt who did not know Yosef. Rav Shmuel, and again Rav and Shmuel argue. Chad amar chadash mamash. One says it was really a new king. V'chad amar shnitchadshu gezerotav. One says that no, he wasn't a new king. He simply renewed his policies. So he was like a new king, that he wasn't actually a new king. So manda amar chadash mamash dechtiv chadash. So the one that says it was really a new king, it's obvious why, because it says vayakom melech chadash, a new king rose up. Umanda amar shitchadshu gezerotav, and the one that says no, he wasn't a new king, but he had new gezerot, he had new policies. Midelo ketiv vayimloch vayamot vayimloch, because normally when a king dies and a successor takes over, it says vayamot. The first one died and the next one ruled. Here it just says Vayakom melech hadash, a new king rose up. It doesn't ever say that the previous king died. So the implication could be taken that it was a new policy, it was a new regime, but not a new king, literally speaking. But according to the side that says that this new Paro in the times of the Exodus, or in the times of the enslavement of the Jews, wasn't actually a new king, so why does it say he didn't know Yosef? How is it possible that he didn't know Yosef? Because he was similar to somebody who didn't know Yosef. In other words, he acted in a way that showed no respect to Yosef and his family. So it was as if he didn't know Yosef. Now, why did we have this last three pieces here? We had it because these are all examples where Rav and Shmuel argue about the meaning of a word, either machpelah, amrafel, or in this case, melech hadash. What does it really mean? And in all three cases, we didn't have a tradition about which one of the rabbis said which view. We just knew that they argued about it. And that's exactly the same as our Mishnah, where ma'abrin and ma'avrin, we don't know who said what. But we know that Rav and Shmuel argued about whether it should have an ayin or an aleph and how it should be understood. So now we get to a piece of Agadata. There's going to be the next 2 pages, Agadot, and interesting things about the learning of Torah. Siman Shmone Esrei Ushnem Asar Lamadnu B'David Vayiven. So we're going to see that this is a siman, this is a mnemonic for the upcoming piece of Gemara. To remember it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Yurchet Yamim Gidalti Etzel Rabbi Oshaya Beribi. There were 18 days that I studied with Rav Oshaya Beribi, the important one. Velo lamadti mimenu ela davar echad, and I only learned one thing from him in those 18 days. B'mishnatenu, in our Mishnah. Ketzad me'abrin te'arim, which is that the proper girsa, the proper text of our Mishnah is with an aleph. Me'abrin. Be'aleph. Any, is that really true? Rabbi Yochanan said that there were 12 students of Rabbi Oshaya Beribi, the important one. And for 18 days I grew among them. In other words, I learned with them. And I learned the heart of each one, and the wisdom of each one. In other words, what that means, I learned their abilities, and I got a sense of what they knew in those 18 days. So how could he say he only learned one thing? So lev kol echad v'echad v'chokhmat kol echad v'echad gamar, because he learned the nature and the knowledge of each one of the students, but gemara lo gamar, but he never actually learned any substance. He never learned any content. In other words, he got to know all of the students of Rabbi Rabbi Oshaya Beribi, but he didn't have a chance to actually learn any content from Rabbi Oshaya except this one thing. That's what he was saying. For those 18 days, I got to know all the students, what they knew, what their abilities were, but I didn't learn anything else except this one thing. Alternatively, what he meant when he said I only learned one thing wasn't that he only learned one piece of content the entire time that he was there. What he meant was that he learned from all the students, but he never learned from the master, Rabbi Oshaya. He only learned one thing. Alternatively, we can take Rabbi Yochanan's statement literally. He learned a lot during those 18 days, but he only learned one thing, b'mishnatenu, about our Mishnah. And the one thing he learned about our Mishnah was that it's with an aleph and not with an ayin. The word ma'abrin. So in any case, it's not a contradiction. The 2 statements of Rabbi Yochanan are not in contradiction when he said that he learned only one thing, and he said that he learned 18 days, and he learned from all the different students. Either it means he learned about the students, but he didn't learn content, or he learned from the students, but he didn't learn from Rabbi Oshaya, or it means he learned a lot from Rabbi Oshaya, but he only learned one thing about this Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan said, when we would learn Torah by Rabbi Oshaya, said Rabbi Yochanan, Hainu Yoshvim, we would sit in one amma, in one space of 1.5 feet, 4 students would sit. In other words, people cramped in order to hear the Torah from Rabbi Oshaya. He was so popular. Amar Rabbi said, Kishahayinu lomdim Torah etzel Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. When we used to learn with Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, it was even more crowded. Hayinu yoshvim shisha b'ama. In 1.5 feet, 6 people would squeeze in order to learn from him. In other words, they really wanted to hear, they wanted to get the best seat in the house, so they would cram in to be next to each other. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Oshaya b'ribi b'toro, k'Rabbi Meir b'toro. Rabbi Oshaya, the b'ribi is an honorific. It means Rabbi Oshaya, the great one, in his generation was like Rabbi Meir in his generation. Ma Rabbi Meir b'toro lo yachlu haverav la'amod al sof da'ato. Just like Rabbi Meir in his generation, he was so deep that nobody could understand what he was about. Nobody could fully understand his ideas because he was so profound. So similarly, the people, the colleagues of Rabbi Oshaya could never grasp his profundity. He was so deep they weren't able to really appreciate his Torah in that generation. Rabbi Yochanan said, this is a famous statement. Rabbi Yochanan said, the heart of the early ones was like the opening of the ulam, of the antechamber of the Beit HaMikdash. And the later generations was like the opening of the Hechal. The Hechal was what's called the Kodesh, the more holy place in the Beit HaMikdash. There was only 10. It was only 10 amot wide. The Ulam was 20 amot wide. It was twice as wide as the Hechal. So what he was saying was, it's like you're walking into the antechamber of the Beit HaMikdash. It's very wide, but then you get to the Hechal, it's very narrow. So he said the later generations were half as broad in their understanding as the earlier generations. And ve'anu and us kimlo nekev machat tzidkit. He said that we are like the eye of a tiny needle compared to them. In other words, if you would compare the great ones, you would be comparing an antechamber to a smaller structure. But we are like the eye of a tiny needle. We're like nothing compared to them. Rishonim, who are the early generations? Rabbi Akiva. That's Rabbi Akiva's generation. Achronim, who is the later generation? Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. Now remember, we were just talking about Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, how great in his generation, how they would cram in to hear his Torah. He was a very great person. And he was from even before the Mishnah was written, obviously, even from before the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He was one of the great rabbis in the times of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And he was inferior by half to Rabbi Akiva, who came before him. Ve'anu kimlo nekev machat tzidkit. And we are like, I'm sorry, I skipped a part. So he says, kepitchosh shel hechal. Rabbi Akiva, Achronim, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. So the later generation was Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. Ika the Amri, an alternative was Rishonim Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. That the early generations is a reference to Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, not Rabbi Akiva. Achronim Rabbi Oshaya b'ribi. And the later generations is Rabbi Oshaya, the great one that we talked about before. In other words, we're knocking it down a generation, basically. And va'anu kimlo nekev machat tzidkit. And we are like in the eye of a needle. In other words, we are like nothing compared even to the generation right before us. Okay? So we're charting the history of the decline of Torah knowledge. Amar Abaye says, and we, va'anan, ki sichta beguda. It's like trying to take a peg and to bang it into a wall in a hole that's too small for it. So it's not only are we not like an eye of a needle, at least the eye of a needle is open. And you can fit something through there. We are like trying to get a peg that's too big into a hole that's too small. In other words, we're even worse than the previous generation because Abaye is a generation or two later than Rabbi Yochanan, a couple of generations later. Va'anan So he says, "Va'anan ki sichta b'guda ligmara." We are like sticking a peg into a hole. Amar Rava says, "Va'anan," and we ki etzba'ata b'kira lisvara, and we are like sticking a finger into hard wax when it comes to understanding. So Abaye said, when it comes to retaining Torah, we are like putting a peg into a hole that's too small, and when it comes to understanding it, Rava says we are like sticking your finger into hard wax. Which, if you've ever tried that, it's not too easy. Amar Ravashi says, "Anan we ki etzba'ata b'bira." It's like putting your finger into a pit when it comes to forgetting. Is it hard to put your finger into a pit? Not really. It's wide open, right? So what he's saying is when it comes to getting the knowledge, it's very hard. When it comes to losing it, it's very easy. for our generation. And this is talking about 2,000 years ago, or almost, 1,700 years ago, or 1,500 years ago. So certainly today it's much, much worse. Now, Amar Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav. Bnei Yehuda shekpidu al lishonam nitkaymat torata biyadam. The people of Yehuda, of Judea, who were very careful about their language, they were able to keep their Torah knowledge. Bnei Galil, the people of Galil, shelo hikpidu al lishonam, they were not careful about their language. Lo nitkaymat toratam biyadam. Therefore, they didn't retain their Torah. Midi b'kpedat al yamilta. Is that really true? Does it have to do with how precise you are in your language, or with how flowery you are, how articulate you are, whether you're able to maintain and retain your knowledge? No, what it means is it means something else. It means Bnei Galil, Bnei Yehuda didaykei, ela Bnei Yehuda didaykei lishana. What it means is not that they were very good with words, not that they were eloquent. What it means is that the Bnei Yehuda were precise with their language, and because they were precise, they could make mnemonics to remember things. Because when you're very precise, it's easier to remember things because things are organized and they're exact, so you can label them and you can remember them. But Bnei Galil, the people of Galil, Bnei Galil la daike lishana v'la mitnachet leusimana la nitkayma toratan biyadam. But the people of Galil, since they weren't precise in their language, when you're not precise, how can you be organized? If you're not organized, how can you remember? So they didn't remember the Torah that they learned. Bnei Yehuda gamru b'mechad rabbah. Similarly, the people of Yehuda learned from one master at a time. They always had one Rosh Yeshiva who was teaching them. So their knowledge was organized and clear. Nitkayma toratan biyadam. But Bnei Galil de la gamri mechad rabbah. But the people of Galil heard the same things taught from multiple teachers. So therefore what happened? They did not retain it because they heard from so many different sources. It was confusing. They didn't have one organized curriculum. Ravina says, Bnei Yehuda de galu Masekhet Eruvin Daf. Bnei Galil de la galu Masechta la nitkaymat toratan biyadam. So what does galu Masechta means? It says that the people of Yehuda revealed their tractate. They revealed their material. So therefore they were able to keep what they learned. The people of Galil did not. What does it mean, galu Masechta? What does this mean? So there are three different opinions. Rashi brings two of them. Rashi says one opinion is that it means they taught others. They revealed what they were learning. And because they taught one another, you retain things better when you teach it than when you just learn it. The other possibility is Galu Masechta means that they revealed the depths of what they were learning. In other words, they worked really diligently to understand it. They didn't just have a surface understanding, but they really went into depth with what they learned. So that was why they were more successful. The Meiri says that what it means is that they would notify people of what the topic was going to be. So the students came prepared. And when you come prepared to a lecture, you end up getting more out of it than if you're unprepared. So now we have two examples of this. David Galei Masechta. David HaMelech was one of those people who was Galei Masechta, which let's assume means either he was really diligent in understanding the Torah or he taught others. Shaul lo Galei Masechta, but Shaul was not so good with it. David the Galei Masechta ketiv bei Yire'echa Yir'uni v'yismachu. Because David was Megalei Masechet, whatever that means, he was Galei Masechet, which appears to mean that he studied very diligently and also involved others in his study at the highest level. Therefore it says, those who fear God will see me and be happy. In other words, he succeeded. Shaul de la Galei Masechta, but Shaul, who did not share his Torah with others and was not as diligent in learning Torah, ketiv bei, it should be let's see, what is the correct pasuk? The correct pasuk is Uvchol asher yifnet yarshia. Everywhere Shaul would turn, he did badly. In other words, lo yazochel lahorot ka'halacha. According to Rashi, it means he was not able to reach a level of Torah learning where he could make halachic decisions. And obviously, you can understand this in terms of the personalities of Shaul and David. David was a person who worked with his advisors. He worked with others. It was a collective process. It was a collaborative process. Shaul got lost in his own psychological problems and ended up alienating his own advisors and his own court, and therefore eventually not succeeding. But we can understand this also in terms of Torah, that the same thing in Torah, in the world of Torah and learning, he didn't succeed because he wasn't able to take in what others had to give. Rabbi Yochanan says, how do we know that Hashem forgave Shaul for his most heinous crime? His most heinous crime was killing the Kohanim of the city of Nov, that he falsely accused of collaborating with David against him. It was a false accusation. Okay, he heard a report that David was there and was given assistance by the people of Nov, but it was actually because the people of Nov thought that David was working for Shaul. They thought they were helping Shaul. Shaul misinterpreted it as a rebellion against him and therefore massacred the entire city. It was a terrible sin. But how do we know that Shaul was forgiven? That it says that when Shaul goes to his final battle against the Plishtim, and he goes and he can't get an answer from Hashem as to what he should do. So he makes the mistake again of going to the witch in Endor, and she raises up Shmuel from the dead. And when Shmuel appears to Shaul, he says to Shaul, tomorrow you and your sons are going to be with me. But that's actually a bad thing and a good thing. It means you're going to die, but it also means imi b'mechitzati, you're going to be with me, meaning you're going to go to Olam Haba. You're going to be in the next world. So Shaul was forgiven for what he did wrong, even though he was punished for what he did wrong on some level. Ultimately, he didn't lose his portion in Olam Haba. Amar Rabbi Abba says, So he said that if somebody could please ask the people of Yehuda, who are very careful about their language, to give us insight into two Mishnaic texts that we don't know whether they should have an ayin or an aleph. One is ours. We don't know if it's me'abrin or me'abirin. We haven't been able to determine that. That's number one. Number two is akuzo or akuzo with an ayin, which is talking about a case of an animal that they want to bring as a korban. Now the problem was that this animal was born without its genitalia fully protruding from its body, and that's considered a defect. So it said if you sit the animal on its tushy and you push it down with pressure, then the genitalia will protrude. If they're ever going to, then they'll come out. So it said akuzo means the tushy of the animal. Okay, so the question is whether with an aleph or an ayin. Okay, so that's what they wanted to ask. He said, I think the people of Yehuda will know this. Okay, so Shil'inu, they asked him. They asked the people of Yehuda, and they said to him, So basically, they knew that nobody knows. They knew that there were two versions. They said, there were some that say one way, some that say the other way. We don't know the right way. You tell me that the people of Yehuda are very precise about their language. Maihi, what are you talking about? Dehahu bar Yehuda, this certain person from Yehuda, that he said to the people, listen, I have a talit I want to sell. Amrule, they said to him, "My gavan talitach, what is the color of your talit?" Amalu, he said to them, "Kitradin ale adama, it's like beets in the ground." In other words, when beets grow out of the ground, they have leaves that are green, they look greenish. He said, he gave them the exact color. He didn't just say yarok, it's green. He gave them, it's like beets.
Beet leaf green.
Right, beet leaf green growing out of the ground. That's what it is. It's so exact. It's like the crayons, from Crayola. Each one is like, the blue, the number of blues that they have, for every type of periwinkle and whatever they have. You have all of these shades of color based on all kinds of different things. There's coffee brown and chocolate brown and whatever else brown. So he's saying it's beet leaf green. It's very precise. Now, what about the people of Galil? So, Bnei Galil de la daike lishana maihi. What do you mean the people of Galil are not exact in their language? Well, Dahu bar Galilah. There was a person from Galil, Davika Azil va'amar lahu. He came to the town and he said, Amar leman, Amar leman. Who has Amar? What does that mean? Who has Amar? What does that mean? So Amrulay, they said to him, Galila shote, you're a foolish person from Galil. Because Chamar lemirkav, or Chamar lemishte, Amar lemilbash, or Emar leitkasa'a. We don't know what you're saying. Are you asking for a donkey? Amar means hamor. Is that what you're saying? And you're just not saying it clearly? That you want a donkey to ride? Or Hamar, you mean Chamar, not Amar, which is wine. You want wine to drink? Or Amar, you mean you want wool to make clothing? Or did you mean Imar? Imar in Aramaic could mean a sheep to slaughter. You want to have meat. Right? So which one do you mean? So we can't tell because they are not articulate. In other words, they don't pronounce the words. They jumble and mumble their words, the people of Galil, and that's why they're not reliable for giving over information about language. Another example, there was a lady, she wanted to say to her friend, Ta'i de'ochlech chelba. Come over and I'm going to give you some fat, some fatty food, some delicious food. But the problem was, Amrala shiluchati tochlich lavi. Instead she said, one that I threw away, a lion is going to eat you. Why would you say that to somebody? She meant to say, she jumbled her words, she meant to say, my friend shiluvati is like my friend, somebody who is connected to me. Come over and I'm going to feed you. Instead, she said, one that I threw away, because she put a chaf instead of a bet, one that I threw away, a lion is going to eat you. Or a lioness, actually, is going to eat you. A woman, she came to the Dayan, she came to the judge. Amrale, she said to him, Mari Kiri, my master, my slave, tafla havetli, I had a tafla, I had a board, veganvuchmin, and you were stolen from me. V'kaduhavat, and now it is dekadshadrulach ilave lamatekar echa ara. That it was so big that if I were to hang you on it, your feet would not reach the ground. Now that sounds crazy, and Rashi says harbe shtuyot. She said a lot of shtuyot. What did she really mean to say? She didn't mean to call the judge my slave, Mari Kiri, my master, my slave. She meant to say my master, my adon, which the word in Aramaic would be kiri with a kuf, adon. She said kiri, which in Aramaic means my slave. She called the judge my slave. She meant to say tavla, and she said tafla. She was missing a board, like a tablet, and she instead said a board, meaning a wooden board, tafla. She said that she meant to say to him that it was stolen from me. Instead she said, you were stolen from me. She meant to say it was as big as, and instead she said, now it is. And she meant to say that if somebody were to hold it up, it would reach their feet. And instead she said, if you were hung on it, your feet wouldn't reach the ground. You don't say to the judge, if you were hung on the board. It's not very nice to talk about the judge being hung on the board. It's trying to say it was so big that it would reach your feet if you put it in front of you. But they were very jumbled in their language and in their pronunciation of words, and it came out all wrong. Now let's get to somebody who knows how to speak, not only who uses language that's enigmatic, but on purpose. The maidservant of Rabbi, who was famous for this. She would speak in a language of wisdom. She would speak in an enigmatic language. Amra, she said, Hachi, alat nikfat bakad, yid'un nishraya lekinehon. She would say that the spoon is hitting the barrel. The eagles should fly back home to their nests. What does that mean? She would have all of the students of the yeshiva eat at her house. What does it mean when the spoon hits the barrel? Or the pot? It's empty. There's no more food. So the eagles need to go back to their nest. That means go back to the yeshiva. There's no more food. Go home. Go back to learn. Go back to your learning. And when she wanted them to stay, she would say, she would say, let's take the piece off of its friend. In other words, let's uncork another bottle of wine, and the spoon will float in the container like a boat that floats on the ocean. In other words, because there's a lot of liquid. In other words, what she meant was, don't leave now, there's more. Okay, because the ladle is going to float in the container like a boat floats on the ocean. Rabbi Yosef bar Asyan, sometimes Rabbi Yosef bar Asyan would speak in the language of riddles and wisdom. Amar, he said, Asuli shorba mishpat. He would say, make me a shorba mishpat. I would like an ox in judgment. Bitur misken, in a poor mountain. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, what does a shorba mishpat mean? It means he wanted beets. Because shor in Aramaic is tor. And what is the word for judgment? Din. So tor din, tiradin, I want beets. Okay, shor b'mishpat, I want beets. What does it mean, a poor mountain? Because mountain is har. And what is poor? Dal. Hardal is hardal. He wants mustard. Okay, so sometimes they would use play on words, a play on words for constructive things. The people of Galil would butcher their words and come out saying nonsense. And you couldn't understand what they were saying. But these people would use it on purpose and be creative with their language. Similarly, when he wanted to ask about the innkeeper, Amar Hachi would say, Gevar pum den chai mazu tova. He would say, the person whose mouth is alive. Okay? So which Rashi explains, what does that mean? It means ush pi zochai, because he wants to see ush piza is the word for an innkeeper. So he would say ish, because he wanted to say ush piza. So he would say the man, gevar, ish. Pum means mouth, pi. And then means zeh, this. So he coded the word ush piza by saying gevar, which is man, and ish, pum, which is pi, and then, which means zeh. So he would say ush pi zeh, ush piza. So he would say, is the innkeeper chai? Is he alive? Mazu tova. How good is he? Okay, how well is he doing? So Rashi says, Kama tovlo. How good is it for him? The other interpretation here is that it was asking, how good is this hotel? So he would ask them in a roundabout way. Right? How good is this hotel? He wanted to know if it was worth staying there. But in any case, he would encode his words in a funny way. Rabbi Abau, ki ava mishta'e b'lashon chokhmah. He would also do the same thing speaking in riddles. Hava amar hachi, he would say, atrigu lepechamin. Etrog the coals. What is to etrog the coals? Let them shine like an etrog. The color of an etrog means let them be very hot. Arki'u lezehavin. Let the gold pieces be spread out. Again, he's talking about the coals that are red hot. They look like pieces of gold. He would say, make for me 2 of those who tell you in the darkness. Who are those who tell you in the darkness? The roosters, because they wake you up in the morning when it gets light. That he would say to them, make on the coals 2 roosters. In other words, he wanted to eat them. Right? So Amrule Rabbanan, the Rabbi Abau, the rabbi said to Rabbi Abau, Hatspinanu, reveal to us, tell us, or show us, Hechad Rabbi Eli Tzafun, where is Rabbi Eli hiding? So notice again, they use 2 words, Hatspinanu, from the word tzafa, to see, right? Show us, where is he tzafun? Where is he hiding? Okay? So they're using a play on words as well. Amar lahen, he said to them, Alatz b'ne'ara, he had a lot of fun with a girl. Interesting, that's what the rabbi was doing. Aharonit, she was a kohen, a bat kohen. Aharonit, she was the latest one. Eranit, she was very wakeful. Vehin, and it says, Vehin ir atu, and she kept him up. In other words, he was up all night having fun with some girl, and that's why he's not here. He's still sleeping. Amrei la, some say isha, that it meant literally that he had a new wife, because his wife had died. He married a second wife. She was a bat kohen, the daughter of a kohen, and she was very lively, and she kept him up all night. But Amrei la, and some say masechta, that it's a reference, it's a metaphoric reference to learning Torah, that he started learning. He just finished a recent Masekhet. He started a new Masekhet. It was a Masekhet that dealt with the laws of the Kohanim, Korbanot, and it was very intriguing. It was eranit. It was something that kept him awake. It was very fascinating to him, and therefore he stayed up all night learning, and he was resting. Amrei Rabbi Eli, they said to Rabbi Eli, Hatspinanu, show us Hechan Rabbi Abahu Tzafun. This time, where is Rabbi Abahu? So this time, they're not looking for Rabbi Eli, they're looking for Rabbi Abahu. Amar Lahan, he said to them, Nitya'atz b'machtir. He took advice from the kingmaker, the machtir. Vehingiv leMephibosheth, and he went south to Mephibosheth. So what does this mean? The machtir is the nasi, the leader of the community, who gives smicha. He's the one who gives ordination to the rabbis, so he's called the crowner, the one who crowns, the machtir. And he sent him south to Mephibosheth. He sent him to learn with the scholars in the south. They were called Mephibosheth because Mephibosheth is a famous scholar from the Tanakh who was the advisor of David, and the one about which David said, Mipiv Boshet, from his mouth I'm embarrassed because he's so smart. And so therefore he said they went down there to learn. So again, speaking in code. They're speaking in code. Amar Rabbi Yosha ben Hanani, Rabbi Yosha ben Hanani said, Miyamai lo nitzchani adam chutz meishat tinok v'tinoket. Nobody ever beat me in an argument except a woman, a young boy, and a young girl. Isha Maihi, what was the story with the woman? Once upon a time I came to an inn. I was in a certain inn. Astali pulin. She made me pulin, she made me beans. Biyom rishon achaltim velo shiartim hen klum. The first day I ate the entire plate of beans and I didn't leave any over. Shiniya velo shiartim hen klum. The second day it was so good I ate all of it, I didn't leave any over. Biyom shlishi hekdichatan b'melach. The third day she put so much salt in the beans I couldn't eat the pulin. I couldn't eat it. It was too salty. So, kevan sheta'amti, once I tasted how disgusting it was, mashachti yadi mehen, I stopped eating it. Amrali, she said to me, Rabbi, my teacher, nipnei ma'in chasoed, why are you not eating the food? It's so good. What's the problem? Amarti la, I said to her, kevar sa'ati mi be'od yom, I already ate today. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. Really, why is he not eating? Food's disgusting. Everyone here has been in this situation. I know you have. You've been at somebody's house, they served you something, it was really disgusting. You said, I don't feel so good, I can't eat. Amrali, she said to me, really, she knew she put too much salt in because she did it on purpose, but he didn't realize that. That's why he said, Nitzchani, this person is going to beat him. Well, if you ate all day, then why did you eat the bread? You only didn't eat my beans, why did you eat the bread? Amrali, she said to him, Rabbi, my teacher, maybe the reason why the food wasn't good today was because you didn't leave over any of your food the other 2 days. Did not the rabbi say, En mishayrin pe'ah be'ilfas, aval mishayrin pe'ah ba'ka'ara? That you're supposed to leave some, not in the pot, but on the plate. In other words, the way they would leave a tip for the waiter back then was not that they would have a big cauldron for all the clients, all the guests in the inn. And then each guest would leave a portion of the food on his plate. And then the shamash, the waiter, would come and he would get to take the leftovers from everybody. I know it sounds highly unsanitary and not hygienic, so I'm trying to imagine, to make myself feel better, that they separated this out to the edge of their plate before eating. And then ate the part. Not that they left them the leftovers that they actually ate. I'm really hoping that that's the case. And then they would collect all of these leftovers and they would eat that as their tip. It was basically their tip. And Rebbe, and the point was that he ate everything the first day. He didn't leave anything over. So the third day she oversalted his food on purpose so he wouldn't eat anything. And she could say to him, oh, maybe this happened to you, this salting, because you didn't leave a tip the first 2 days. And that was her way of telling him, hey, have some class, you got to leave a tip. Now, so the next story where he got bested by someone, Tinoket, who was the girl that bested him? Once I was walking along the way, and the path went through somebody's field, and I started walking on it. The girl said to me, Rabbi, my teacher, Lo sadehizo. Isn't this somebody's field? How can you walk through it? How can you trespass on somebody's field when they want, it's not a public thoroughfare? Amartila, I said to her, Lo derech kavushahi. No, it's a path that's been trodden already. People have already walked on this path. I'm not the first one. Amrali, she said to him, Listim kimotchak vashua. You're right. The ones who walked on it were robbers like you. Listim kamocha. Right? So in other words, she said to him, other people who were not ethical, they were the ones that kavshua, that they conquered it, they walked on it. You shouldn't do it. So in other words, he basically was judging from the fact that it was obvious that people had walked on it, that it must be okay, but just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you should do it. And therefore the little girl corrected him. Tinok Maihi, what was the case of the Tinok? This is very famous and was made famous by Rabbi Steinsaltz because he made a book, I think, named after the story. That the story is that once I was walking on the way, I saw a boy sitting on the crossroads. Amarti lo, I said to him, which way should I take to the city? Amarli, he said to me, Zo ktarav aruka. This one is short but long. Vizo aruka uktara. The other one is long but short. What does that mean? Ve'alachti b'ktarav aruka. So I took the one he said was short but long, because since it's short but long, it sounds like short is first. So I'll go there first. He goes there. Kevan shigati la'ir. When I finally got to the city, matzati shemakifinota ganot upardesin. it was completely blocked. In other words, the path took you very quickly to the city, but the entrance to the city was blocked by all kinds of gardens and orchards. There was no way through. There was no passage through. So he came back. Chazarti l'Achorai. I went back. Amarti lo. I said to him, Bini, my son, halo amarta li. You said to me, Ktara, that it's Ktara. It's short. Amarli, he said to me, Velo amarti l'cha aruka. Didn't I tell you it's a short way, which is also long? Why is it a short way that's also long? Because it's short to get to the city, but since you have to come all the way back and go the other way, it's very long. Right? The other way might be a little bit longer, but you don't have to come back because it's not blocked, so it's shorter. It's like when they ask you, what would you rather have? The way that's shorter, sometimes the GPS will ask you, or the MapQuest, if you use MapQuest, do you want the shorter distance or the quicker time? Okay? So in shorter distance, the first way, but not in quicker time, because you can't get through that way, you have to come all the way around. So Nashakti al Rosho, I kissed him on the forehead, V'amarti lo, and I said to him, Ashrechem Yisrael, fortunate are you Jewish people, Shikulchem Chachamim Gdolim Atem, that you are all great Chachamim, Migdolchem ve'ad ketanchem, from your great ones to your small ones, you are all wise. The child was very careful with his words. He spoke exactly the truth. And he encapsulated the lesson, and obviously there's a metaphoric lesson here too, which is why Rabbi Steinsaltz wrote a whole book called The Longer Shorter Way or something like that, I believe. It's a book. And I think that the idea behind this Agadah that many people say is that sometimes you take shortcuts in life, but the shortcut in life ends up causing you a lot more problems than taking longer. For example, a person eats McDonald's every day, or they eat fast food, it's much easier. It's so easy to, it costs you $2, you get junk food, you eat junk food. It's harder to make a meal, you have to cook, you have to get fresh food, and you prepare it, but it's much healthier. So at the end of the day, the shortcut is good in the long, it seems easier. But in the long term, it ends up being more problematic and less healthy for you. So in the same way, many times we take shortcuts in life, but in the end, it costs us more than taking a way that's a little bit longer, but gets us directly to where we want to go.